let's talk about some of the best things to love about St. Louis. St. Louis has its good sides and its ugly sides. It is not a perfect city. It has social, political, economic issues. There's racism, there's declining population, there's crime. I get it. But today, in this video, let's talk about some of the positives, despite the negatives. If you're moving here, these are some things to get excited about. And if you already live here, these are probably some things you already know that make St. Louis great. And if you're new here, welcome to the Living St. Louis channel. My name is Jacob Peistrup. Let's get right to it. Number one, low cost of living. And the reason I think this is so powerful is that if you're early in your career, it is so realistic to be able to buy your first house or your first condo in or around St. Louis. And maybe I always talk about this because I work in real estate, but I really feel this is not something to overlook. The cost of buying, the cost of renting, the cost of building a new house, if that's what you want. It is so possible to live here in your early to mid 20s, fresh out of school, and to be able to buy and own your home. Now, look, I know the cost of housing is going up everywhere these days. It's getting more expensive. And the same goes for St. Louis. But if you're somewhere in the St. Louis area, it is so realistic to find something on the market in the 200,000s, even below 200,000, depending on where you are, whether it's a house, a condo, a townhome. And, in the short term, it might not make a big difference to you. Like, oh, I could buy a house and have a mortgage. I could rent for a few years, whatever it is. But I feel like in the long run, there is definitely a difference between building your career in a more affordable city versus one of the uber expensive cities where people don't start buying homes until they're in their early to mid 30s. And I know there's a lot that goes into choosing where to live than just how expensive it is to buy a house. But the fact that my real estate team and I, we get to work with so many people who are in their mid-20s, they just finished up school, they're excited to start their career, and we can help them buying a house, starting their life. There's just something exciting about that to me. The ability to buy or even rent the kind of house you want is just more possible than the more expensive cities where it's going to be $4,000 for a studio apartment, and it's like, that's depressing. Anywho, like I said, my team and I are practicing realtors. If you would like help buying a house or selling a house or moving to St. Louis, holler at us. Just send over an email or send over a text. If you're moving to St. Louis and you want some help, we would love to share this city with you and help you get your boots on the ground. Completely up to you, no pressure. Let's move on. Number two, the food, the arts, and the culture scene in St. Louis really makes it feel like a much bigger city than it is. And I know these are kind of some smaller things about living in St. Louis, and they're not really the main reason you would live or not live in a city, but it's just stuff like the food scene is great. You have food from all over the world. It's not super expensive. You have local cafes and restaurants absolutely everywhere. The arts and the culture, you have everything. We have museums, the symphony, the orchestra, the theaters, the art, the music. In my opinion, St. Louis just really has a thriving cultural scene. And I'm not just talking about the touristy stuff like the zoo, Forest Park, the Arch, the City Museum. I mean, like, if you want to be able to go out and listen to some jazz or go watch a play or visit a new art exhibit at a museum, there are constantly different things you can choose from, and there's always something new to go see somewhere around St. Louis. Even the history and the architecture you'll see around town, I mean, like, St. Louis was kind of in its prime 100 years ago, around the turn of the century. That was like the golden era. There was the 1904 World's Fair, and you see a lot of these remnants of that. And yes, there are some things that have gone downhill since then, but if you think about it, in 1950, St. Louis was the 8th biggest city in the country. So it was a big deal back then. And if you look for the right things, I feel like you can still see some remnants of that greatness, if you want to call it that you might not really expect to see if you're just looking at St. Louis on the surface level. Now, number three, St. Louis can be world class for some specific things. I'm not trying to say we are a world-class city or best in the world. Trust me, St. Louis has its issues. But what I've noticed, especially getting to talk to so many people who are moving to St. Louis, whether St. Louis is a good city for you or not depends on a lot of things. What are you looking for? What industry are you in? What are you looking to get out of it? But I feel like St. Louis is really top notch for certain industries. You look at stuff like aerospace, huge in St. Louis. Agricultural technology and biotech, huge. There's the food and beverage industry, massive. Believe it or not, St. Louis is also a top city for chess, which I didn't even know that. Now, I know there's the Chess Hall of Fame here, so that makes sense, but I actually didn't know that we were that good for it until someone commented that on a YouTube video. And there's a good amount of Fortune 500 companies headquartered somewhere in or around St. Louis. A lot of them are in Clayton. And I mean, there's just some that are big enough, like education, healthcare, financial services. Every city's got something to offer in those areas. I feel like sometimes St. Louis can be hit or miss depending on your circumstances, but there's a few areas and a few sectors where St. Louis is surprisingly better than you would think. Now, moving on to number 4, in a few ways, St. Louis can just be a comfortable and convenient place to live. We might not be the most exciting city in the world, but you can get all over the place in under 30 minutes. The highways take you anywhere. They all connect to each other. St. Louis has one of the shortest commute times because we really don't have much traffic outside of peak rush hour. Compared to, like, let's say Los Angeles or New York, you can live in St. Louis, you can live downtown, and you can have friends that live out in St. Charles, and you can hang out in 30 minutes. And not only the convenience within St. Louis, but keep in mind, we're pretty much in the middle of the country. So if you're making a trip somewhere, St. Louis makes it pretty easy. We're close to a bunch of major cities. Whether you're flying or you're road tripping it, I definitely think there's something to be said about that convenience factor. I mean, it makes it very doable to just plan a weekend trip to Nashville or Chicago or Kansas City. We have all this stuff that's not super far away. You have all your big chain stores and franchises and retailers. Now, if you're moving from a bigger city than St. Louis, we might not have everything you want, but if you're moving from a more rural area, St. Louis has all of the good stuff that you would expect in a relatively large city. Now, the city itself is not the biggest, but the St. Louis metro area is almost 3 million people. So there's a lot of stuff we got going on in the city and around the city. Which brings me to number 5. You have a surprising amount of outdoor stuff you can do within about 3 hours of St. Louis. So for example, now the city and the areas around St. Louis City are on the flatter side, but if you go 30 minutes, 45 minutes outside the city, it'll start to get more hilly. If you enjoy stuff like hiking, fishing, boating, hunting, dirt biking, there's a lot of places you can go outside and do that kind of stuff. We've got hiking trails. There's some cool state parks. There's conservation land, caves you can go explore. There really are some fun things you can do. You just have to look for it. And, going back to the last point, it's easy to get around. You can live in the city and plan a day trip out to Defiance or Augusta on the weekends and go hiking or go fishing, do whatever you want, and just be outside. And now look, we don't have mountains on the same level as Colorado or Wyoming, but if you enjoy doing stuff outside and having more scenery to look at, there's more than just cornfields if you go outside the city. So, just a few quick things to hopefully get you excited about St. Louis, put you in a better mood, think about some of the good things that we have here. This list is not exhaustive, so if I didn't mention something or there's something I should have talked about, just let me know in the comments. I always love checking the comments on my videos. Aside from that, thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And I will see you in the next video right here on the Living St. Louis channel.